Counting the breath in Qigong practice. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. So counting the breath is used in a wide range of different practices and traditions. Of course, in this vlog, I'm going to focus on Qigong because that's my main area of knowledge and expertise. I've been exposed to lots of different things, but really that's what I know most about. And when we think about counting the breath, that can mean more than one different thing. So probably the most common thing we think of when we count the breath is counting the length of the inhale and the exhale, and sometimes pauses in between the inhale and exhale. Other times it can be counting the number of breaths as well. So I'll talk a little bit about both of those. Primarily to begin with, I'll talk about counting the length of the inhale and exhale and possibly pauses, because that's sort of the main thing we're normally talking about there. And so there's a variety of different reasons and why we might do this within a practice and different benefits that come from it. So one of the first reasons and benefits of doing this is because it can be a great tool for helping to simplify the focus of the mind. There's a common saying, I know I've mentioned it in this vlog a number of times, that where the attention goes, the energy flows. And that can sound a little bit esoteric and weird, maybe to people who are not familiar with working with the mind and body and energy together, but it's a very direct and practical thing. If you put your attention on your hand, your nerves become more active in your hand, because your brain is like paying attention now. And then as part of that, when the nerves get more active, there's more blood flow and so on. And this extends into all sorts of different things. Where we put our attention, naturally energy flows there. And day to day, as we're doing different things, our attention might be scattered on many different things, which means our energy is being dissipated and going to all these different things. And when we're doing Qigong practice, we're wanting to often bring our energy from all those many different things onto one simple thing, or it might be a combination of things, but we're wanting to bring it in and make it simple. As we direct our energy. So again, Qi means energy, Gong means work or skill. We're wanting to develop skill and really direct that. And counting is something really simple for us to focus on that can then bring our attention in from all the different things simply to counting. Specifically, counting the breath means that we're not just counting, but we're also now connecting that attention to something that's going on physically within us. So it's a great way to bring the attention inwards, simplify it, and start to clear out other distractions and ways that our energy might be diverted. This then puts us in a state where we're more concentrated, we're more focused, and that is specifically on what's going on within us. Great starting point, great tool, useful in meditation, sometimes in other practices as well. Then we get into the specifics of, okay, now what are we doing with that count? Because it's one thing to just count, to observe and count. And again, just observing and counting is simplifying our focus, bringing it in onto ourselves. But once we've done that, we can influence our breath quite easily. We can make it longer, we can make it shorter. And so we can start to intentionally use that counting as a way. To begin with, probably the first thing we focus on is slowing down our breath. Because when we slow down our breath, the rest of the functions of our body respond. And we go from maybe being active and, having our energy, very, maybe possibly even turbulent, to having our energy become more relaxed, more steady, more even, as all the functions of our body start to align with the slower breath. And we get a nice, slower, smoother movement of energy through our body. This is really useful, again, for further calming our mind, calming our body, for then being able to notice more subtle details of what's going on within our body, within our energy. When we calm things down, slow things down, we can pay attention to those details much more easily. So great, at a very practical level for things like stress reduction or management, right? But also it acts as a tool of awareness, deepening that awareness further. There are different patterns that we can use as part of this slowing the breath and making it nice and balanced. I guess that's part of it as well. It's balancing the breath out, not just slowing it, but often making the length of the inhale and the exhale balanced with each other. Now, the reason why we often want to balance the inhale and the exhale is because our body responds differently to the inhale and exhale. And generally we think of these within Qigong in terms of yin and yang, one being the more relaxing, passive, one being the more active, and having, contrasting effects on the internal organs and the flow of energy to the external body as well. I'm not going to get too much into all of that in this particular vlog, but to create a nice balance between yin and yang. So we're slowing down, we're balancing yin and yang, and that would mean balancing the length of counts of the inhale and the exhale. We can then work with different rhythms of the breath to achieve different effects. And so this ties together, all of the different things I've talked about so far in this vlog, where part of this is often slowing down for many practices, but then getting more nuanced in terms of how long is the inhale, how long is the exhale, and also how long are the pauses in between the inhale and exhale. So really adjusting how the energy is flowing through our body and the rhythm that it's moving at. One of the, I don't know how famous it is really, certainly it's used a lot within the long white cloud Qigong practices, and it is used elsewhere as well. But yeah, one of the common rhythms that you'll learn, early on is an 8-4-8-4 rhythm. So it's inhaling for 8, then there's a pause for 4, exhaling for 8, and then a pause for 4, and then inhale, and so on. And so it's a very deep, slow, regulated breath. And this helps to bring the state of the mind and the body into a very deep state of relaxation and also focus and awareness. And it acts as a tool to start to be able to bridge between conscious awareness and awareness of things that we would normally think of as unconscious. And so we can start to observe and work with those more effectively. But there are other rhythms as well that we sometimes use. And again, a lot of this is often to do with adjusting the balance between yin and yang. Sometimes it's also about developing physical capability and capacity within the body as well. So, for example, you might do a type of breathing practice where you have a very short inhale, but then a long exhale. And a good way to do this is to count it. And so you might inhale for a count of 1 or 2, depending where you're at with the practice. 2 is easier because it gives you a bit more time. Once you're more, comfortable with it, more skilled, you've developed some capacity, you might inhale for a count of 1. And then you exhale, and you extend that exhale and see how many counts you can extend that out to before you then need to inhale again, just for a count of 1 or 2, as the case may be, and then extend and so on. And you typically do this while doing some type of physical activity. And this can help to develop the capacity to inhale fully and deeply while still maintaining relaxation through the body, which then helps with then developing endurance and so on. You may sometimes also do things the other way, where you do a slow inhale and then a short exhale. And again, the easiest way to do this or develop some of the skill is to count. And, count the length of the inhale and then do it. Well, if it's a short exhale, generally that's always just going to be, a 1 count out because you're trying to let it all out at once. And this, converse to being able to breathe in very, rapidly while maintaining relaxation. Doing this allows you to develop a skill of being able to exhale very rapidly, of course. So to have a very deep breath and let it all out all at once, which is then very useful for, if we go a step further than just the breath, what's happening with breathing in, breathing out, to be able to release energy very quickly, very fully. So that's another skill that you can develop. And then there's other nuances of fine-tuning the rhythm where you might use different lengths of inhale, different lengths of exhale, different lengths of pauses to shape the pattern of the flow of energy within your body, within your system. And that can get, quite interesting to work with, playing with, or exploring some of those rhythms and the effect that they have. Now, it's useful, this counting, it's a really useful tool to get into these patterns, to start to develop these skills. At a certain point, though, it can actually start to get in our way. I did say I was going to talk about counting the number of breaths as well. I'll talk about that a little bit first before I get into how counting can get in our way. So sometimes counting the number of breaths is also a way of maintaining focus while doing a certain practice. And it's a way to keep the focus relatively internal rather than too external. Because you might, as you're developing a practice, want to extend the amount of time that you do for a particular practice. So a classic one for this would be something like Zhangzhuan practice, which is still standing practices. And you might want to gradually be able to stand and maintain a relaxed focus for longer and longer and longer. And there's different ways you can do this. You could do it by just having a clock and watching the clock, but that means that part of your attention is now going outwards rather than on what's going on within yourself. Sometimes in the past, people would use things like burning sticks of incense and things like that. But again, it means part of your attention is outwards. Whereas if you're counting your breath, you have a tool that you can use to extend and sort of know where you're at and be able to extend that longer and longer. But the attention is on something happening inside you, and so it's keeping that attention inwards. Yeah. So counting the breaths can be really useful for that too. Anyway, back to how the counting, much as it's a useful tool, eventually, for most people, is something you want to be able to move beyond, because it's really useful in the early stages and in the intermediate stages as well, to count and to use set rhythms and to use this as a tool. But at some point we realize that the counting that we're using is an approximation of what we're really wanting to achieve. Yeah. So maybe a good one to explain this or discuss this about is that breathing pattern I mentioned. It's referred to as breathing with the rhythm of the universe, with the 8-4-8-4. So inhale for 8, pause for 4, exhale for 8, pause for 4. If your focus is too much on the counting, you can think of this as almost a very linear sort of pattern where you're inhaling, and then you stop. And then you hold and you pause, and then you stop. And now you're exhaling, and you stop. And then you pause. And that's a good starting point, because it gets you roughly into the rhythm. But the actual rhythm that we're wanting to achieve is much smoother than that. It's more like a wave. And there's gradual transitions between the different phases. So there's a big up phase, the inhale, building up. But then at the top, it's not like we stop and then, hard stop and just hold the breath through. What there is there's a gradual transitioning at the top as the pressures change internally. And so you might not be inhaling anymore, but the pressures are still gradually shifting and changing. And then you move into the outwards phase, exhaling. That gradually accelerates, and then it slows down. And then at the bottom, it's not a hard stop, but there's a gradual shifting, changing of internal pressure and tensions as you shift and then prepare to inhale again. And so ideally we want to move past just counting, thinking of it in a linear way, to really feeling that wave and feeling the nuances and the shifts and the changes as we go through. And the same applies to other things where or potentially we would count the breath. If we're working with a different rhythm, when that count becomes like an artificial regulation, whereas really what we're wanting is as a smoother, more natural shape and to what's going on within the energy within our body, within the tensions and so on. Similarly, even in terms of directing our awareness inwards and making our focus more simple, that count it's useful as a tool because it simplifies things down, it naturally directs us inwards because we're using the breath. But at some point we want to just observe, right? We want to just be present, and the count is something that is being imposed and is actually like a layer, a layer back from actually just observing and just being. So it's a great tool to get us close. So in all of these things, it's a great tool to get us close to the rhythm that we want. It's a great tool to get us close to just observing what's going on inside us. But at a certain point, ideally we want to move beyond that to the true rhythm or the true internal observation. Anyway, hopefully that's interesting or useful for some of you. Thought it was a worthwhile topic to discuss. I look forward to seeing you on another vlog soon.